it's interesting. You talk to vendors, like, I was talking to my lawyer the other day, like this was a really difficult and monumental lift for them, right? Like to get people to work from home and to try to promote collaboration, and they've got security concerns and so on. Fortunately for us, a half an hour after we announced, which is like March 10th or something like that, that we were going virtual in response to this, people were up and running at home. Maybe they grabbed an extra monitor on their way out and are fully up and running within minutes. For a lot of organizations, that's not the case, but I think the deeper underlying aspect is that just like buyers, our people want the flexibility to be their best self, to work in their best environment, and so on.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. Now, that was Justin Gray. Justin's the CEO of LeadMD. And in this episode, our conversation is focused on what Justin calls hyper-value sales. Now, I love talking about value and sales, and in this episode, Justin and I talk about how to move value to the front end of your sales conversations. Justin says that sellers need to ask and understand what is it that only you can provide to the buyer, and bring that to the forefront of your conversations. Justin and I will dig into how you can make that happen, and he shares strategies that you can use to bring hyper value to your buyers earlier in their buying journey. That all translates into credibility and influence that will help you win the deal. So all this and much, much more. But before I get to Justin, I want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it. And if you subscribe, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could also give us your feedback about how we're doing in the form of a review. Thank you. All right, let's jump into it. Justin, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's been a while since we spoke.
It has.
So you're weathering, so to speak, the storm in Arizona.
Yeah, we are. I guess a lot's changed since we spoke last.
Yeah. So family's healthy and safe?
Yeah, that I can't complain about. So we've got, probably when we talked last, I probably had one. Now I've got two. So we've got a 7-month-old daughter and then a 3-year-old son who is like, I don't know, 23, I think.
Yeah, well, yeah. It's funny. It doesn't matter what generation, when you have kids. Yeah, everybody says the same thing.
Yep.
When they're young. They seem like an adult. We remember with friends who their daughter didn't speak for a while. Yeah, she was almost like 2.5 or something before she really started talking. But then it came out in like complete, fully formed sentences,
right? Like
speaking to an adult.
Yeah, no, his vocabulary is insane.
Yeah. Well, that's good. So you said you can't complain about that. What can you complain about?
Oh, honestly, not much. I think this it's going to sound bad to say, but this has been a really exciting time, I think, from a marketing standpoint, simply because
the pandemic.
Yeah, the pandemic. Simply because it's
we want to get that quote so we can put that on social media.
Put that on the masthead.
Right.
People have really started. I think a lot of people hit the reset button and really embraced a lot of the things that we know we should have been doing forever, and you could kind of skate by not doing those. And this has really forced everyone to put the customer at the center of everything that they do and really focus on, are we providing something that's mission critical? And do we know what that mission criticality even is to that?
Sure.
Client? So in that way, it's been very positive.
Well, before we jump into that, so tell people a little bit about LeadMD if they're not familiar with you.
Yeah, for sure. So LeadMD is a full-service performance marketing consultancy, and really what that means.
Performance marketing, yeah. What does that mean?
So that means that we focus on exactly what I was kind of hinting at there, which is what is the true objective of the organization, and how is marketing providing outcomes that influence that objective. All too often, marketing is clicks and attention and quote-unquote engagement and so on. But when you look at the stats that are out there, they're pretty abysmal. Forrester has like a 2018 stat that states that 1% of all marketing-driven quote-unquote leads actually convert into revenue. And 1%.
So 1%. Do you think that's changed since then?
I don't think it's changed substantially. I think, like, as I said, like a lot of leading or the foundational items that people needed to embrace are finally getting embraced. The whole ABM movement, it was a lot of like flash and bang in the pan, but not a lot of true organizational behavior change. And I think you're starting to see some of that actually take root now. But on the whole, marketing is the first that gets cut, and it's the first that gets cut for a reason, because people can't draw, or we haven't done a good job of communicating what marketing's true value is, and then providing the optic into how is marketing influencing the business? Like, why should we spend our dollar there? And why should that really be the first place that we spend our dollar? So I think that's starting to change.
How do you help companies turn marketing into a performance organization?
Yeah, I think the first question is always why, right? Like, why do we want to do this? Why have you done that? We historically started from RevOps, which is really, a discipline that was created by the movement of marketing into a software-driven discipline, right? Like the marketing automation boom and giving marketing its own platform and really transitioning marketers from vendor managers to a discipline that had to create things internally, launch initiatives internally, and then measure the results of those initiatives. So coming from RevOps, you have this notion of we're going to buy X, Y, and Z, and it's going to yield all these great results, which of course doesn't happen. And so
but X, Y, and Z meaning like your tech stack,
marketing automation. Yeah, exactly. The marketing and sales technology. That purchase alone really does nothing, but often amplifies gaps that organizations have. So there's a lot of, someone's got their finger on the button, and now we can send a million emails or, a million messages out to folks, and
which they
there's
do.
a lot of danger in that. Yeah, for sure. So it really asking the why of what are we trying to achieve? Why do you need to purchase this? Do you really understand at its core who your buyer is, the value that you're providing to them, the messages and information and education that they need to empower their organization, and just really getting those fundamental dependencies in place so that you can quote unquote scale a marketing engine, which I think is where most people start, but we walk them back to the beginning and help them make critical decisions along the way there.
So if you were to look at sort of the landscape and say, okay, we got this report in 2018, which, yeah, I mean, if only 1% of marketing generated leads are contributing to revenue, that's obviously problematic. Mm-hmm. Let's sort of, as you do, sort of walk it back. What is the beginning? What's the first thing that, the CMO needs to look at to say, yeah, we want to make a real contribution here?
Yeah, I think it all has to start with relationship to the buyer. And by buyer, I mean, someone moving through the stages of a customer relationship. And certainly after that customer relationship is formed, I think marketing needs to curate and manage that relationship as well. So that's, if you ask most organizations, the one thing that they will agree on is that they have a data problem, and data is our representation of how well we know that buyer and customer. So I think we have a customer relationship problem, and that's always where our first focus is going to start, whether it's just understanding the work that they've already done and maybe they're in a good spot there, or the much more predominant, which is, no, we need to really do some further exploration there and understand who that customer is, again, what they fundamentally need. And that's the benefit that this pandemic has brought is, immediately everyone that was not mission critical was cut. So whether you wanted to or not, you just took a really large NPS survey. And all of the attrition that happened in that process, I think, was a big wake-up call. Inversely, day two, everyone wanted to immediately reach out to their customer and say, how are you doing? How are you getting through this? How's this changing your business? And so on. And for a lot of organizations, that was just a motion that they couldn't run. They didn't know who they should be talking to over there, or if they knew that person, they didn't have a relationship in place. And so that's a problem, and immediately the first fire that we want to put out.
Well, when you talk about they didn't know who to talk to, marketing didn't know who to talk to, is you're talking about them providing messaging to sales to communicate to the buyer, or marketing talking directly to the buyer as well?
Yeah, I mean, where relevant, marketing has to be talking directly to the buyer as well. Most organizations, certainly that we deal with, have some sort of a tie-in or benefit to the marketing department. So, let's take a software provider for example. Like, oftentimes that software it has legs in marketing. The marketers within that org are using them. Maybe it's a CMO. that CMO and the CMO of the organization that provided the solution should have some level of a relationship. They should know the other key buying or members of the buying committee within that org, and should be aligning and orchestrating the same folks within their organization to make those connections. So does your executive team, have a good relationship with theirs? Are you helping them at the practitioner level? How are you supporting their usage? That was the other thing. Like, if number one, is the solution mission critical? Number two, how do we get more value out of the solutions that we already have? Those are the two questions across the board that we see organizations asking. So do we have a line of sight into how they perceive our value? Do we understand what they are relying on us for? Do we understand the true reason why they even purchased our product, solution, whatever it is, in the beginning?
Oftentimes
and those
not.
are all, most often not. And that goes into measuring usage versus measuring impact. Most organizations measure usage. How many logins, how many activities, how many, whatever that, if it's an email solution, how many emails did they send last month? Not indicative of the impact that your solution is making over there. And so that's, again, a really loud wake-up call.
Well, and that's also, not understanding that is a failure on the part of sales as well. I mean, it's
correct.
Chances are they probably didn't win the business if they didn't know what that was. I mean, usually customers have.
Honestly, I find that oftentimes initiatives get filtered down into features and benefits at a buying level, at least at the exploration. The time of exploration. Can you do X, Y, and Z? And so,
I agree. But I think the challenge for sellers is they have to.
Yes.
They have to say they have to find out what is the one thing, because there's always one thing.
Yep.
There's always one thing that's driving that decision. You need to find out what it is, because that's, to your point, precisely. That's 6 months down the line. It's not about usage. It's what is the value they're getting from that one thing.
Correct. And then stewarding that. So even if sales does a great job at that, how do we capture that in a way that immediately informs the onboarding process, the customer success process, the customer service process? How do we steward that as our North Star throughout that customer journey?
But I think you also raised another interesting point to get back to is that, and I see this, and I guess I hadn't been thinking enough about it here in the last 6 months to a year, I don't see enough of the executive teams making those relationships with their counterparts.
Right. Agreed. And that's such a powerful, again, like when you look at the fundamentals of ABM and kind of that whole movement, that was a really key element to ABM, right? The whole orchestration and threading within customer organizations or any organization, partner, vendor, whatever. That was such a great element there, and it kind of got pushed aside, to your point, and we need to embrace that as fundamental.
For exactly the reasons you talk about. I mean, first of all, it's really important with retention, I believe.
Absolutely.
Is that if you don't have those relationships and it just gets down to usage, as you talked about, you're going to be in a bit of a hurt right there.
And they change all the time as well, right? Like you look at the average tenures out there, and people are taking new positions all the time. Now we've got this element of folks that have been furloughed and let go. So that's a relationship that has to be actively curated. And again, we focus marketing and sales so much on net new acquisition. And you look at everyone's comp plans, and they're all centered around that concept. But what we're losing, what's slipping right through our fingers, is driven by the fact that we're not incentivizing people to steward that relationship and ensure that goal is passed along to each element of our organization. So yeah. I think a lot of things have to change there.
All right. So one of the topics you've been talking about, sort of follow on to what we've gone through here recently, is and I think you make the point, it should have existed prior to the pandemic, but now more focus on it, is what you're calling hyper value sales. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think so let's get back to the fundamental of ABM, right? Like we should know if we've done an exercise to really define our addressable market, our ideal customers within that market, then we know that we can make an investment within those organizations, and it's going to be worth our time. Again, probably the most valuable thing for me that ABM and the concept brings. Mm-hmm. So if we know that those are valuable organizations, they're the types of orgs that our solution fits really well with, we provide just mission critical solutions for, then why do we put so many filters and gates in front of engaging with those organizations? Like, you have to, buy in this certain way, you have to pay us money, and that's fundamentals of capitalism and commerce. I get it. But if you know that is a great customer for you, then why not make the investment earlier within that cycle? Why not enable them around the purchase of your solution? Why not give them the things that we're normally holding off, maybe providing late stage, once someone's already signed a contract and they're into onboarding or whatever, then we give them these really helpful assets and tools. Why not give those to them up front? Why not give them access to our solution up front? Yeah, so I think you saw this with a lot of, what I would call compassionate offers as a result of the pandemic.
Right. Educational software.
Right. Free trial. Yeah. Zoom. Right. Like, hey, take this platform, use it for 3 months, and we're gonna really focus during that time frame on making you successful with that platform. If you're providing that to a group of folks that you already know are going to be great clients for you, what's the harm in doing so? In fact, the conversion rate off of a marketing or sales activity along those lines is so astronomically higher than that terrible, abysmal 1% that we talked about. Like, why aren't we leading with those types of activities, those assumptive purchase activities? And I think, again, the pandemic opened up the door to be able to do so, but your great organizations have been doing that for a long time. You look at someone like a Slack, hey, let's get them hooked on drugs. And that's exactly what Slack did. And to this day, it's the one solution. We spent a lot of money on technology. It's the one that's ever been driven, unanimously across the organization. We want to use this. It's great. We've got to get it. And now we pay Slack a decent amount of money every month. So, I think it's just that mentality.
Right. But what you're talking about, though, is not a freemium model. It's much more deliberate than that.
Yeah, exactly. In some cases, it's freemium. In other cases, in all cases, it is education and enablement. So you take let's rewind to marketing automation, like 2008. No one knew what they were committing to at that time. You get this platform, and suddenly you look under the covers, and it's like, oh, what's your lead scoring methodology? Well, no one really had a robust systematized lead scoring methodology. So I think Marketo, for example, in a HubSpot, still does this, did a great job of giving tools to that buyer to show them, like, hey, when you actually are to the point where you need to purchase a technology like this, these are the things that you're going to need to have in place. In fact, go use them with whatever you're using right now. And so, you saw a lot of their content, that I think John Miller did a great job of creating and disseminating, was about preparing the buyer for that purchase, and that they could also realize some value of it even without buying that piece of technology. So that's really at the heart of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I was thinking those are good examples too, because certainly in pandemic we've got, as you talk about, Zoom, educational software, other applications. People had this crushing need that is identified,
right?
But it's thinking about it more sort of, assuming we get past this period of time, is a more mundane, sales situation. Is you talk about moving value to the top of the conversation. So, like, a good way to frame it, and I think you said something about this once I was looking at an interview you had done, is that it's about really focusing on what is it that only you can provide to the buyer. This gets back to the thing we talked about, the one thing, right? Is if you do a great job of identifying that one thing, it should align to that one thing that only you can provide to them.
Right. Or are willing to provide to them, right? Like so one of our examples. So I mentioned, as we were chatting before the show, that a lot of our clients took their go-to-market strategy back to phase one and really started kind of rebuilding. Okay, now during this period of time, who is our buyer now? How has that buying process changed? What do they really need at this point in order to feel comfortable moving forward? And then the output for a lot of those folks were quote unquote playbooks. How do we immediately enable a sales team that is now fully digital? They're fully inside with a motion that they've never conducted before. And so we immediately started hopping in and just doing free go-to-market workshops. Normally on a one-to-one basis, like, hey, account A, we know that you're struggling with this. Hey, we just want to help you retool and restructure that go-to-market motion as it pertains to marketing and sales. No strings attached. Like, let's get in there and give them exposure to what is our greatest asset, which is the minds of our consultants that we would normally put behind this long sales process. Maybe they get, involved and provide some value in that process, but it's still all about getting the engagement. So why don't we just move that to the front of the process and just start consulting with them from day one? And that, it does two things. Number one, it provides immediate value to them and builds the brand that we want to be known for regardless. And number two, it increases that conversion rate exponentially, because now they see like, wow, I want more of this person's time. How do I get that?
Yeah.
And then you couple that with things like, okay, we're everyone's got budgetitis right now, and like we're struggling with everything being reduced. Like, what is the best way that we can help you both now and into the future? And I think that mindset is really at the core of hyper value marketing and sales.
Yeah, and I would add something parallel to that, or aligned with it, is that, and to your point about how we sort of lost track of this, is what I call speed to value, right? And it's like, okay, we're speed to outcome, let's call it. What can be solved now? Right. I mean, yeah, we may have furloughed employees, we may have canceled projects, but we still have some things that are really important that we solve now, and they may have been part of a bigger, transformation project we're looking at, but we need to fix it now. Right. And so I think for sellers, the real challenge, and marketers as well in the ABM sense, is let's identify these smaller things, perhaps more compact, more discrete projects where the customer needs to fix it now, they need to implement it now, and they can recognize their ROI more quickly and get that, again, speed to outcome, which just locks you in.
We use that term low-hanging fruit all the time, right? But like, it's
less obvious in this environment, right?
Yeah, this is critical stuff that, again, like a lot of those blockers got kind of shifted away because people were focused on, how do I stay in business? How do I, make happen what I need to keep our doors open, or to keep investment dollars flowing? Like, these are really critical questions. And I think the value or the benefit was we were able to strip away a lot of the bureaucracy around that and just run, and do so in a really agile manner. And that's where organizational alignment comes into play. And the orgs that had that in place, they could quickly say, we're going to change. How do we do that organization wide with our executives aligned in their teams, able to execute on that direction very, very swiftly? That was such an exciting time in the midst of something that was really terrible.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to go back to a comment you mentioned about low-hanging fruit, because I wasn't really talking about low-hanging fruit. And I think this is the part where most people miss it, is they look at the low-hanging fruit, but that's a matter of convenience, right?
Sure.
What we're finding is, what do they really need?
Yeah, what are those critical items that we can solve for?
And low-hanging fruit is considered to be sort of obvious, right? Sure. This is not going to be obvious necessarily. It's going to take some work. But to your point, if you're providing the value up front, if you're having the conversations, then the right way, having the conversations, then you're going to uncover what these really critical needs are.
You have to put some really intentional focus on this and ensure that what is coming out of those discussions is really going to move the needle.
Yeah, and this is I think it's been sort of the hard part for a lot of companies, because so many of the conversations, I think, are maybe well intended but very superficial. And because people are so afraid, I want to express my empathy, but in doing so, I make sure I don't really want to push. And it's like, it's not a matter of pushing. They want you to ask about, we still have these critical needs. We need help. And they don't always customers don't always volunteer those.
Well, I think that's a great point about like kind of that fake empathy, because so many people position that as a sales play just to get over the hump of what was going on. Then they ran them right through the normal process that they would have before. And that's not what we're talking about here whatsoever.
So what does the future of work look like for LeadMD?
So I think, like a lot of it's interesting. You talk to vendors, like, I was talking to my lawyer the other day, like this was a really difficult and monumental lift for them, right? Like to get people to work from home and to try to promote collaboration. They've got security concerns and so on. Fortunately for us, I mean, a half an hour after we announced, which was like March 10th or something like that we were going virtual in response to this, people were up and running at home. Maybe they grabbed an extra monitor on their way out and, are fully up and running, within minutes. For a lot of organizations, that's not the case. But I think the deeper underlying aspect is that just like buyers, our people want the flexibility to be their best self, to work in their best environment, and so on. So we've always been a work from home as an option culture, right? Like most people will take probably a day a week and work from home. We did a big return to work survey. And the biggest thing that stood out is, although we have that in place, I don't always feel like I can actually do that. And so I think it's about the license to ensure that we're providing that flexibility when needed, but we're also understanding what the value in coming together is actually meant to provide, which is education for other folks and the sharing of stories and just the communication of that tribal knowledge and so on. So it's definitely more flexible. And at the same time, I think it has to be more intentional, because when we are I think a lot of people are right now feeling that, wow, it is difficult when you don't have those like in-person huddles where you're kicking around solutions to a client problem and so on. So I think it's just about doing what a lot of people have said that have kind of burnt out, and then they look back at it. It's like, I wish I would have been more intentional about the time that I spent at the office. And at the same time, I want the flexibility to live my life, to be in an environment where I'm not distracted and so on. So definitely that like flex space. And we've focused a lot at even changing the office to promote that. We were a traditional bullpen environment where everyone's, out in the same space. And during this time, we've lit up a ton of privacy offices. Like we've remodeled the office while everyone was out to provide some of that like alone, focused, non-disruptive time as well. So I think it's just a better hybrid.
And so are people coming back to the office yet, or are you still working remotely?
No. So, well, we are starting this next week. We've got like 5 folks that have situations at home to where they've got kids that are there and they just are really having a hard time focusing. So we're opening the office back up to a very select number of people, and ensuring that they're not only 6 feet apart, they're 25 feet apart. But Arizona is an absolute hotbed right now, so we're trying to keep everyone separated for as long as possible. And I think September is kind of our bookmark at this point, but that bookmark may move.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean it's a tough thing for so many companies.
It's changing day by day.
And yeah, I mean at this point you and I are talking 2nd of July, excuse me.
Yeah.
I've lost track of time like everybody else.
New quarter.
Yeah, I mean it's heading in the wrong direction, so it's really hard to predict what's going to take place.
Yep.
So a question for you. This is a more general question. I ask this a lot of my guests now, and you understand you come from a marketing background, but you've, CEO, founder, you do a ton of selling. So other than learning from experience, how did you learn how to sell? And what I want you to do is you get 5 answers, and they all have to add up to 100%. And so the answers are coaches, mentors, 1, 2 is peers, 3 is customers, 4 is self, meaning reading books, listening to podcasts like this wonderful podcast, and 5 is some sort of employer provided training. So coaches, peers, customers, self, training, added up to 100%. Where do you think you come out?
Yeah, I would say lowest on that totem pole is certainly employer provided training. Like I've been through probably 3, 4 like formal sales training methodologies, and although I think they've got good chunks and elements to them, like I can't say that that's been the predominant influence by far. Like I'll just make the math easy and say like 70% of that comes from, I'll say, mentorship, because there are some intentional relationships there, but like observing someone that's really, really good at the profession of sales, and like I'm an echo type person. Like if you show me someone that's doing something really well, like that's the best way I learn.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
definitely most heavily influenced by folks that were just at the top of their game, that were reading the customer, that were really, asking a ton of questions and just, mirroring a lot of that behavior, certainly the first and foremost.
Okay, so mentorship number one, 70%. So you got
Yeah.
30% to split among four.
Yeah, and then experience, right? Like that was one of the options out there.
No. Setting aside,
No?
everybody learns from experience. So this is the specific things. So peers, customers, self, or training.
Yeah, so I would say customers is definitely next on that line, but customers aren't always as forthright with feedback at the end of one of those engagements. I wish they were more forthright, honestly. It is a question that I ask and that we ask as an organization, just in terms of like, all right, can we dive in here?
Right.
And I think there's, for whatever reason, there's always a trust element, and if they're not willing to share really deep insights into that, that's on us. We haven't built the
It's a red
trust.
flag. It's
Yeah,
a red
exactly.
flag, by the way. Yeah.
So customer feedback is critical, whether it's just saying yes and doing some retros and introspection on what went well there. I think that's probably 10%. Tack on to my monster 70% item there. Peers, definitely a good factor in that. Like I love watching even non-sellers, and our consultants do a great job of this when they're talking to clients, and we record most, if not all, of our calls here. We all get questions like, what do you do with those? Like, we really do pass those around internally, whether it's, you need to listen to this to be on the next call, or whether it's just like, hey, I think this is a great example of objection handling, or whatever happened in there. A lot of times non-sellers are just an excellent point of reference there, because, we get into such a habit of quote unquote selling, that sometimes we don't approach things from a different angle, or just ask what is a really obvious question. And so what's my last one? Self
and peer and training. Yeah.
Training's
at the bottom.
Training's like 1%. I guess I'd put the rest bucketed into self there. It's just you have to go out and consume things like this and learn on your own and get as many perspectives as possible. But to that point, like for me, self is really just a gateway into the mentorship and example based learning. Because if someone's doing something really well, like I want to reach out and talk to them. And that's the biggest piece of advice I give anyone that reaches out to me, is like, you reach out to people. Like they will say yes. Very, very rarely has anyone said like no. It may be like a month gap before someone gets back to you and says like, oh man, I meant to follow up on this and so on. But like very rarely do people say no when you ask them to have a chat, and I'd say just have some really intelligent questions prepared, be intentional there. And I think that can just be such a powerful resource.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, that's good. I like that answer. I mean, it's your answer. I mean, it's not that I'm judging the answer. I like that answer, but we're going to build up a little database of answers.
Cool.
So,
yeah, it's a one profession that really doesn't have, I mean, like there's so many, Sandler selling and Challenger sale and so on. Like there's so many formal methodologies out there, but I feel like there needs to be like a great database of examples as well. And that's something that the profession could really use.
Well, I think we need to understand how we're actually learning.
Right.
So, we spend $20 billion a year on sales training. And if everybody says it contributes, they feel personally it contributes 1%, then that's sort of a problem, right? Why are we spending that $20 billion? So
is that $20 billion? I had no idea the number was that big.
Yeah, in the U.S., that's the number I'd read online, and so my take is not on your 5 questions, but on I think we have to ask ourselves as a business is are we providing any value for that? And I can think alternatively is if we think that sellers learn primarily from coaches and mentors, let's say, then maybe we should be spending the better fraction of that $20 billion training coaches.
Yep. No, I will say that's one thing when I ask other people, like, hey, where did you learn that? Or like, what's been the biggest influence? Everyone always has that one person.
Yeah.
that they worked under. It's like, oh,
Yep.
it's like, that guy or gal like blew the doors off everything that they touched, and they reference that individual. So yeah, I think that's a big reference point for anyone.
Yeah. I mean, for me, there were two people in particular, but yeah, I mean, they influenced me, throughout my entire career. I always look back on what I learned. So
It's powerful.
All right, Justin. Well, thank you very much for joining me.
Absolutely.
How can people connect with you and learn more about LeadMD?
Yeah, email is always the best way, jgray@leadmd.com. Pretty active on LinkedIn. I'm actually /LeadMD on LinkedIn, and Twitter @jgraymatter.
Perfect. All right, Justin, a pleasure.
Awesome.
We'll do it again.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. I'm so grateful for your support of this show. And I want to thank Justin Gray for sharing his insights with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you could also leave us a rating or review, let us know how we're doing. Well, we'd certainly appreciate that as well. And you can do all that on your phone in less than a minute as soon as this episode is over. So thank you for your help. And thank you so much for investing your time with me today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.